Otherwise, it looks unruly. Yeah, I know. Well, they're not up yet. That's why I ordered.
Not waiting on me, but
I know. I saw yours too. Yeah, I know.
I don't print out emails. I need paper copies.
Are you looking for an agenda? Are you looking for an agenda? They're outside. I'll have Denise bring you one. I'll have Denise bring you one.
Cool.
Okay, I'm going to ask you the.
good morning and welcome to the Board of Supervisors August 16th meeting. Please join me for the flag salute, followed by a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please be seated. Okay, we'll start off with Board of Supervisor matters. I don't know what to call you, Supervisor Vanderpool. You different looking little rascal here lately. Anyway.
Well, I have to say, I think I got the nicest compliment that I've gotten since this experiment has been taking place. I was told by a constituent on Saturday night that I look distinguished.
Oh, distinguished.
Ooh, how's that one? How's that? All right. Thanks for noticing again, though. I'm glad that you can still see it.
Wasn't the people live out here on the creek?
No, it was not, Alan. So real quick, just want to go over a few things. Had an excellent meeting yesterday with Alliant, our new health plan benefit consultant. What an outstanding team, and I definitely think we are getting what we pay for with them. So I thought that went really well. And some of the specifics that we really talked about is just an overall view of how they see the SJVIA from an outsider perspective. It's easy for us to look at it as Tulare County because we are one of the founding entities, but from a 10,000-foot overview, they see that we do have some challenges as Tulare County going forward just based on our enrollment size and what we comprise of the JPA. Just between Fresno County and Tulare County, Fresno County accounts for 45% of all plan enrollees. Tulare County accounts for 23% of all plan enrollees. We have 3 governing board members. They have 4. But I think the real interesting information came down to breaking down the plan data. When you look at the enrollment in the PPO versus the HMO plans and the blending between those 2 options that we do each year to try to control rate increases, in Fresno County, they have almost 80% of all HMO plan enrollments. And HMOs have been having, or the HMO plans have been having double-digit increases the last 4 years, and those double-digit increases have been offsetting or have been kept in line because of single-digit PPO plan increases. So if you look at their 80% in Tulare County, we only have 6.3% of HMO plan enrollments. So 80% of our, 80% of the plan is from Fresno County, and only 6.3% is Tulare County, but the rates are being kept down by Tulare County's PPO population, which has been historically performing very well and getting healthier. So then you look at the PPO side, and on the PPO side, Tulare County has, I believe, 82% of all PPO plan, 82.6% of all PPO plan population here in Tulare County. So just looking at who's carrying whose weight and who it's most beneficial for to be in the SJBIA. These are all questions that we're really looking at, and Alliant from the 10,000-foot overview is really taking a hard look at trying to make sure that Tulare County undertakes the best option for our plan members and our employees. So I felt very good about them and look forward to the discussions and the decisions that are going to be coming going forward. Also, I wanted to touch on an issue that we've been having that's been brought to this board. Not so much here lately, but I give kudos to Animal Services of Tulare County for their work on this subject matter, but that is related to feral cats in Mooney Grove Park. I'm very excited that Supervisor Worthley extended the invitation to me to participate in a feral cat planning meeting next Tuesday. So that's all I have.
Thank you, Supervisor Vanderpool. Supervisor Cox.
Yeah, just three things. First off, we had our follow-up space planning committee meeting last week with our capital projects people, with department heads that are being affected. It went very, very well. Just from that initial meeting where we reduced the scope of work to be done in the three buildings that we addressed, the old agriculture advisory, or the old agriculture building across the street, our county council office and HR office next door, and then the Cigna building. Just reducing that scope of work was like a fresh breath of air, being able to look at the plans and see what's actually proposed. It's moving quick enough to where we're expecting to have our 90% look at the completed plans on September 8th. So that means by before the end of this year, we'll see those plans done, the bidding process done, and contractors actually working over in those buildings. So it's pretty exciting to see that moving forward so quickly, and we're actually able to reduce the scope of work to the point to where we're well within budget and things will move well. Next off, for those that attend, our Agriculture Policy Advisory Committee has been canceled Wednesday, and our next meeting will not be until September. And then, even though I missed the TCAG meeting yesterday, I was happy to read through especially the Measure R portion of that. And the Measure R revenue last year was up 2.5%. So that seems to be, a very good positive deal. Well, if you look back to the way the plan was written, it's actually a 45% increase, because the original revenue for Measure R was figured at a flat level of $22 million per year. We did add later on, a few years later, an inflator to that. But the way the plan was originally written, we were only planning on $22 million. We actually brought in $31.5 million. So I think that's why Measure R has done so well, while it will continue to do well, and we'll continue to see several million dollars, especially to Tulare County, to work on our rural roads and cities, from $2.5 million down to what the smaller cities get. So that's been very successful, and I don't know if you talked about it, but that's kind of the big story with Measure R, is that it's performing well above what was expected. And I think even though we've had issues with some projects coming in higher lately than we thought they would be, when we get towards the end of this plan, I still think there's going to be money left over, and we'll still be adding projects within the next 5 to 10 years. That's it, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Supervisor Cox. Supervisor Worthley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Friday, we had a meeting of the San Joaquin Valley Water Infrastructure Authority in Fresno. Of note, the Technical Advisory Committee presented a plan of how to get to our application. We have to submit an application by June of next year to try to access funding for the Temperance Flat project on San Joaquin River. And it was quite invigorating for me to see a layout of various milestones of how to achieve that and how to get there in a timely fashion, laid out by the Technical Advisory Committee. So that continues to move forward, and of course it is a very significant project for the San Joaquin Valley, especially if you've been following what's happening with water, in terms of transporting water across the delta. There's a 2.9 million acre feet of water behind Shasta Lake. They had about 130% normal of rainfall and snowfall in Northern California last year, and yet when you look at San Luis Reservoir, it's down at the lowest level it's been in 27 years, and that's creating a lot of problems. So trying to provide our own water supplies from our own backyard will reap many, many benefits to the San Joaquin Valley, certainly to Tulare County. On Thursday, we have an air board meeting in Fresno. Again, continuing to grapple with the issue of PM 2.5. We had a presentation yesterday at TCAG about this from Tom Jordan of the Air Board, and what the serious implications are for the valley. And we will continue to battle that issue, because it really has very serious consequences, both from transportation systems in terms of construction of additional. It won't do us a lot of good to have the money if we're not able to access federal funding to go along with that, and also the impact it has on our economic development in terms of new businesses and expansion of business in the San Joaquin Valley. So very, very critical issue. That's all I have today, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Supervisor Ishida.
2 weeks ago, I attended a meeting in Fresno that was going over the forest plan for Sequoia, Sierra, and Inyo. And it is my impression that the plan is outdated, is obsolete. They've worked on it for years, but what's happened is we have had the drought and the bark beetle, which I think has substantially changed the direction of what a plan needs to be. The meeting was somewhat disappointing because we didn't have really a chance to voice our opinions to everyone at the meeting. They had stations set up to where you went to 4 or 5 different stations and you could talk to staff people. I believe we're going to try to bring this before the Board of Supervisors for a letter to the Forest Service, probably stating that they need to look at what are they going to do after the 20 million trees we have in Sierra Nevadas are gone. And what are we going to...
66 million dead.
Oh, excuse me, 66 million. There's probably 80 million. What are they going to do with the forest after those trees are gone? And it seems at this point in time, the only logical way to get rid of 60 to 80 million trees is they're going to have to burn. We do not have the opportunity or the capacity to harvest that many trees. Last week I was absent. I took my annual Sierra Nevada survey in the Golden Trout Wilderness. It's kind of odd. Last year I was evacuated due to the cabin fire, and I had a chance to go back through and walk through some of that area. Fire behavior is really strange. You'll find a row of trees burnt, then nothing, then you'll find a clump of trees burnt really bad, and it's just extremely spotty. While up there, we camp at 8,500 feet, and the bark beetle is at 8,500 feet. We had 5 trees in a clump that was affected by the bark beetle, so not only are we going to lose trees in the lower elevations, the bark beetle is moving higher in elevation. Tree line is about 10,500 feet, so you're almost getting to tree line. The other thing that was surprising, the trees that were affected, you would think it'd be a massive bunch of bark beetles and a bunch of boreholes through the trees. It's not so. They're relatively scattered, and it's not in the concentrations that I would expect from my farming experience. It doesn't take that many bark beetles to kill a tree. And the tree we cut down was probably a 30-inch diameter tree. And we didn't get to the rest of them. But it's going to be a real problem in the future, and the Forest Service and the federal government need to do something about the potential of what's happening and plan for the future. The other thing I learned was amazing is I learned that if you were in the Golden Trout Wilderness and if you were hunting or you're fishing, You cannot transport any game out of the Golden Trout Wilderness by air.
Out of any wilderness area.
So you have to bring it out by foot, and that is a fish and game law. So that was a little quirk that I learned. Next, speaking of fires, Lake County is getting hit again, a very severe fire. But what I've noticed in the last couple months here is I bought a spotting scope the other day, and I'm looking through my spotting scope, and I see I can't see as much as I expected to see from that spotting scope. Then finally the light went on. There was so much smoke in the air, particulates in the air, I couldn't see the mountains. And what we need to do as a nexus as local government is let the federal government know that most of the smoke's coming off federal land. It has a direct health impact upon the residents of the San Joaquin Valley. And what we found out at the insurance authority, we had an increased rate of asthma and breathing issues last year, and that's partially why some of our rates are going up. So we have to make that nexus to the federal government that you're really hurting our health in the San Joaquin Valley because you're mismanaging your land. Next week I'll be absent. I will be attending a California Rail Advisory Committee meeting, and that's all I have.
Thank you. Thank you. I thought you were going to tell us the reason you couldn't see anything to your spotting scope was the fact you didn't take the cap off. Thank you, Supervisor Sheeta. This week, the 18th, Thursday, I'll be having my Upper Thule meeting, which we have every year at Camp Nelson at the fire station. We'll have Resource Management Agency there, Tulare County Fire Department, CAL FIRE, California Highway Patrol, Tulare County Sheriff, U.S. Forest Service, Southern California Edison, and Caltrans. We always have a pretty good turnout. We usually have 40, 50 people show up from either Alpine, Sequoia Crest, Ponderosa, Camp Nelson, Pierpoint area for this meeting, and we just, we talk about maintenance on the highways, snow removal, hazardous tree removal, the different responsibilities of the different agencies, and responsibilities of the community. So it's always a good meeting, and looking forward to that. Friday, I'll be meeting out at Sierra Forest Products with Tricia Seaver Battler, John Guthrie, Larry Dewson, Julieta Martinez from our staff will be meeting out there with us to talk the forest plan and put ideas together, probably for our, you'll be there too, good, Supervisor Wordley, getting everything together for possibly a letter to the Forest Service, or letting them really know what we feel the issues are, because it's right here in our backyard, and it's a big part of our county, over half our county, so looking forward to that. I want to commend Sheriff Boudreau and his staff. I see Under Sheriff is with us this morning, and it's good to see you guys, and you're doing a great job, and good work shutting this human trafficking ring down in Tulare County. That's a big issue. I also see Michael Grove out there. Michael, thank you for all your efforts in our suppression of these illegal marijuana farms throughout the county. I get paperwork, seems like every week from you, and I think the other supervisors do too, so keep that up. So that's all I have this morning, and we'll move on now to public comment. Anybody wishing to talk on issues of the board, but not on today's agenda, may do so. And I have Susana Aguilera Moreno wants to speak. Welcome.
Thank you, Chairman. That's Susana Aguilera Marrero, and because people can't pronounce it, they call me Sam. Please do so.
I'm an Okie, so it's hard for me to
Aguilera Marrero will work. Good morning. Again, my name is Susana Aguilera Marrero. I'm from Tulare, California. Do you need my address, or the paperwork was okay?
No, paperwork's fine.
Okay, terrific. I'm also president for the Tulare Kings Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and I'm here to invite you all. In fact, last year you guys were one of the sponsors. We've either not yet received that check or it has not yet been made out. For Strengthening Roots is the name of the 2016 Central Valley Latino Conference, going to be held at the Visalia Convention Center, California. That's going to be on Thursday, August the 25th, and Friday, August the 26th. This is a two-day conference focusing on mental and behavioral health issues of Latino family men, women, teenagers, and groups. Some of the classes that are going to be offered this year are substance abuse, mental health, evidence-based practices, domestic violence, alternative treatments, cultural models, trauma-informed care, youth development, indigenous teachings, and various others. We invite you to please support, embrace it, as these are issues that impact our communities in the rural area. Thank you very much for your time. I'll leave a copy of the flyer for each one of you to review, and hopefully look forward to seeing a check to support perhaps some of our youth that are practicing our educational type models in college. Maybe sponsor one of them for each one of your districts. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak to the board under public comment? See, that's fine. Come on up.
My name is Desiree Cortez, and I'm with SEIU as a member.
You have your address?
4736 West Iris, Visalia. Okay, and what I'm going to speak about is the lawsuit that SEIU has with the county, and I've worked for the county for almost 10 years, and have been a member most of that time. My issue today is the county's failed appeal to deny county workers the wages bargained and earned after the first freeze. Each worker owed is greatly impacted by the 2-year delay to give us our earnings, and then after that delay the union was forced to sue the county to pay their debt. The union won its right to be paid in a PERB panel and a 5th District appeal decisions, and the resulting 5 to 10 or more increases are significant to us. It isn't all of SEIU, but those who earned it during the time that we were not paid. And that meant that those people could have, some of them needed it to have reliable transportation, affording needed medical care, and preparing their children for school, simple things that many people don't have to think about. But because of the low pay or the lower pay, it very much impacts the lives of our members. Okay, unfortunately, the BOS is continuing, the Board of Supervisors, you, are continuing to deny these payments needlessly. It's costing the county 7% interest per year to delay these, to start the payment to the employees as they've earned. Okay, I hope that you will see that the advice given by your council may have been misdirected, and now is the time to take responsibility and own up and pay us all. Okay? Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to speak to the board in public comment? Okay, seeing no one, we will close public comment, and we will take up our consent calendar. We're going to pull item 16 off for a separate vote. Any other items that pull? Seeing none, then.
Chair, motion to approve consent calendar, list item 16.
Second.
Okay, moved by Supervisor Cox, second by Supervisor Worthley. Cast your votes, unanimous. Okay, now we'll take up item number 16.
Mr. Chair, I just asked to have that pulled for a separate vote.
Move approval, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
Moved by Supervisor Worthley, second by Supervisor Sheeta. Cast your votes. The vote is 4-1 with Cox voting no. Thank you. I think we have a few minutes before we take up our timed items. Should we go to closed session for 5 minutes or so, or just take a recess?
We do have things that are on. It's the board's preference if they want to go in now or...
Want to just wait? Recess for 5 minutes?
Let's recess for 5 minutes.
Okay, we'll recess for 5 minutes, and when our timed items come up, we'll take them.
You know what's going to happen? They won't do anything. It turns into chef, which takes more water.
Probably need to sit in your bench room somewhere with that bomb deal and figure it out.
Are you ready?
Yep, 9:30.
Where's our buddies?
Thank you.
Okay, back in session. We'll take up item number 3. Approve a program income and grant funds budget adjustments for Community Development Block Grant Program. Mr. Washam.
Good morning, Chairman, and other board members. When I see Supervisor Vanderpool, I just think of that commercial, the most interesting man in the world. I think he's retired. Maybe he's auditioning for that. So he's distracting.
I usually think of,
Stay thirsty, Mike.
Stay thirsty, Mike.
Stay thirsty.
I usually think of something
Well,
else,
today
but that's
for your
okay.
consideration is a CDBG grant adjustment to the budget. This is actually a very good news item. The county was awarded $2 million grant back in 2014. Originally, the county reserved $93,000 for planning and technical assistance activities, $41,000 plus for a housing survey, which went along with the housing element update, as well as $51,000 for the early Mark community plan. One other note is that all program income funds now have to be expended prior to spending any of the grant funds. So therefore, a supplemental activity was added to that grant to purchase a water tender for the fire truck for the department, which your board approved at the time the grant went forward. So what this is a shift of funds. The countywide housing survey was completed for $35,000, which was $6,860 less than the original budget. So rather than disencumbering those funds, staff is proposing to shift those funds to the Early Mark Community Plan to help with that effort, and this will allow for a more enhanced analysis of the infrastructure needs within the community. So that is the one request, is to shift those funds rather than give them up. And secondly, the water tender was ordered back in January of 2015. The cost was almost $340,000. At the time, the county had $285 in program income. So your board, back on January in 2016, authorized $55,000 from the general fund to make up the difference. However, since that time, the county has received $55,000 in program income. Therefore, staff is requesting the authorization to pay for the water tender entirely with program income funds or combination of the grant and program income funds, therefore, and thereby saving $55,000 for the general fund. So basically, that's what we're requesting today. Here's a quick a budget analysis of the shift. You can see in the housing survey, originally budgeted for $41,000, is shifting to $35,000, and then the community Early Mark Community Plan is increasing the same amount. And then down below, you see that The funds from program income increased from the $285,000 originally to $340,000 to cover the fire water tender. So the purpose of this public hearing is to receive comments and input from the members of the community regarding implementation and administration of this the county's CDBG program. With that, there is a sign-in sheet if any members of the public wish to sign that. So the request is to hold a public hearing and to approve the shift of funds within the planning and technical assistance activity of the grant, as well as authorize payment for the water tender with program income and/or grant funds only. That would conclude staff's report, and if you have any questions.
Any questions? Board? Well, I know this was a good move for this water tender due to the fact of the drought, and many places had no water, and so we needed these extra water tenders when we go out to fight a fire because there was no water there to fight it with. So very good, and then the real good news is we're saving the money out of our general fund to pay for it. So good deal. Okay, we'll open the public hearing. Anybody wishing to speak to this issue may do so at this time. Seeing none, we will close the public hearing, bring it back to the board.
Mr. Chair, I'll move for approval of this item.
Moved
I
by
think this is a
Supervisor-
great deal.
Supervisor Vanderpool, second by Supervisor Ishida. Cast your votes. The vote's unanimous. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, we're going to take up item number 4, and I have I have a little script here to read before we start. This matter before the Board of Supervisors, item number 4, is a public hearing to consider an interim ordinance prohibiting the establishment of new or expansion of existing medical marijuana entities, including collectives, cooperatives, businesses, or other entities engaged in commercial cannabis activity in the unincorporated areas of the county. Under Government Code Section 65858, this interim ordinance requires a 4/5 vote. If passed, it will be effective immediately and will last for 45 days, unless the board votes to extend it to a subsequent public hearing for up to 22 months and 15 days. In order to consider this ordinance, the public hearing is noticed, and staff has prepared a presentation for the board. After opening the public hearing and taking staff's presentation, we will take public comments on this matter. After the staff presentation, any interested party will be allowed 3 minutes to speak to the board. The only exception is this limit will be at the sole discrimination of the chairman. All written materials submitted during the public hearing should be handed directly to the clerk of the Board of Supervisors and not to the board members. The clerk will appropriately distribute the materials to the board. As mentioned earlier, the supervisors will have the opportunity to review all written materials before the supervisors deliberate and reach a decision on a proposed action. Any materials, including documents and pictures submitted, will become public records and must be retained by the county. Please note that submitted materials speak for themselves, and if you wish to submit materials to the board but also want to retain a copy and have not made copies, you may submit the materials and obtain copies from the clerk of the board. Once the floor is open to public comment, we ask that the individuals wishing to comment approach the podiums one at a time and speak directly into the microphone, giving your name, address for record. Please remember to check the timer in the right-hand corner of the overhead screen visible to the public for the amount of time you have remaining during your statement. Please address all questions to me, the chairman, instead of the individual supervisors, county staff, or any member of the public. If appropriate, we will ask for any response to be needed. That's pretty much the opening statement. Ben, you may go ahead now. Thank you. Item number 4.
Good morning, Chairman, board members, Mr. Spada, County Council. Ben Reese, Interim Director, the Resource Management Agency. And the request before you this morning is to hold a public hearing to adopt an interim ordinance regarding the regulations for the cultivation and distribution of medical marijuana within the unincorporated area of Tulare County. This report and presentation was prepared in a collaborative manner between staff from the Resource Management Agency, Tulare County Sheriff's Department, and Tulare County Fire. I will go into a brief history of our current ordinance and regulations. The Resource Management Agency is responsible for the civil enforcement of the current medical marijuana regulations. We have a building and housing division with approximately 20 staff members, including code enforcement officers who are responsible for enforcing the current regulations. Michael Grove, our lead code enforcement officer, will talk to you about the civil enforcement concerns regarding the cultivation of marijuana in Tulare County. Sheriff's Department Detective Tim Johnson will go over some of the criminal threats that we've seen, and our fire chief, Charlie Norman, will talk about some of the fire hazards that we've seen regarding marijuana cultivation. I will then go over with you the proposed action, which is basically to put a moratorium on the expansion of existing collectives and cooperatives within Tulare County. Our Chief Environmental Planner, Hector Guerra, will discuss the CEQA analysis that was made for this interim ordinance. I will summarize the request, go over the acknowledgments, and then we'll be able to answer any questions that you may have. So Article 11, Section 7 of the California Constitution gives the county the police powers to enforce local ordinance to promote the public health, safety, and welfare of its citizens. This is what gives the county the authority to enact regulations regarding the cultivation of marijuana in Tulare County. As such, the board has adopted several county ordinances with these powers to regulate medical marijuana. This is a history of some of the current county medical marijuana regulations. In February of 2006, the county adopted an interim ordinance to temporarily prohibit medical marijuana dispensaries. In May of 2007, the zoning ordinance was amended to regulate medical marijuana dispensaries. In December of 2009, the zoning ordinance was again amended to regulate medical marijuana collectives and cooperatives. In December 2009, two parts were added to the Tulare County Ordinance Code, Part 5, Chapter 11, and Part 6, Chapter 21. And these parts regulate the possession, consumption, distribution, transportation, cultivation, and growing of medical marijuana, and implement licensing requirements for collectives and cooperatives. So to summarize the existing county regulations, our regulations only allow for collectives and cooperatives. Those are the only entities permitted to cultivate or distribute medical marijuana in the unincorporated areas of Tulare County. Only indoor cultivation is permitted, and the Resource Management Agency is responsible for the civil enforcement of these regulations. In 2013, your board adopted an interim ordinance. This came about due to growing concerns as to whether the existing regulations at that time could sufficiently address the threats to the health, safety, and welfare of Tulare County and its residents related to medical marijuana cultivation. There were legal challenges in place or being brought forth at the time across the state that would challenge the local regulation of marijuana, which had the potential to undermine Tulare County's ordinance. So at that time, the county adopted an interim ordinance prohibiting the establishment of new medical marijuana collectives and cooperatives. The notice, after proper notice and hearing, the moratorium was extended to March of 2015. So moving forward to March of 2015, prior to expiration of the ordinance, RMA staff presented a report describing the measures that were taken to address the threats identified. Most importantly, some of the legal questions regarding local control and regulation of medical marijuana had been resolved in favor of local control. The report reviewed the enforcement activities during the interim ordinance and concluded that the interim ordinance could address the health and safety threats through proper enforcement. So since that time, since March of 2015, there have been major changes to the regulatory landscape. The Medical Marijuana Regulation and Safety Act was introduced in mid-2015 and became effective on January 1st of this year. It is also important to note that there is at least one ballot initiative that would legalize recreational marijuana on the November 2016 ballot. And that has the potential to affect our local regulation. So the Medical Marijuana Regulation and Safety Act, as we'll refer to it as MRSA here in our presentation, the implementing regulations are still being drafted. We do understand that local control will be permitted under the Act, but there is a disconnect between the MRSA Act and the county's existing regulations. Specifically, under MRSA, there's 17 different licenses required under the new scheme. Some of those licenses will require county permit before the state will issue the license, and so our current ordinances doesn't align with that. Our current ordinance only allows collectives and cooperatives. The new legislation will phase those out. And our current ordinances only allow for not-for-profit cultivation, whereas the new legislation would allow for commercial or for-profit cultivation of marijuana. Since the MRSA legislation has been adopted, there's been an increased interest in commercial marijuana activities within Tulare County. This increased interest, combined with the disconnect between the legislation and our current ordinances, we believe will lead to an increase in unregulated medical marijuana activities, which could pose a threat to Tulare County and its residents. Our code enforcement officer, Michael Grove, will talk about some of the civil enforcement concerns that he's seen. From our sheriff's department, Detective Tim Johnson will talk about some of the criminal threats that he's come across, and our fire chief, Charlie Norman, will talk about some of the fire hazards. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mike Grove.
Good morning. Michael Grove, Code Compliance with RMA. Been the Marijuana Code Compliance Officer since June of 2012, and currently a Building and Zoning Inspector for RMA. Implemented the marijuana ordinances through an educational process. And then we also held property owners and other individuals accountable for their failure to comply. There's been an expanded interest in commercial marijuana activities. Prior to the fall of 2015, responses or questions were sporadic. Since October of 2015, when MRSA was adopted, at least I've fielded in excess of 30 different inquiries regarding obtaining a county permit or license. Those requests for licenses were for a variety of different permits or licenses in cultivation, dispensing, laboratory, manufacturing, and transportation activities. Generally speaking, the conversation ensued regarding the new state laws. Oh, what did I do? There we go. Some individuals or entrepreneurs, even though we had conversations with them, went ahead and moved forward without licenses and began commercial cannabis activities. In 2016, RMA investigated a minimum of 2 different buildings that were intended for marijuana activities and were being remodeled without permits. These persons were conducting remodels, admitted to code enforcement that the buildings were intended to be either marijuana dispensaries, collective cooperative cultivation sites, or a combination thereof. At this time, it should be noted that no areas in the county are currently zoned for dispensaries. They conduct illegal remodels, which become dangerous. They're not constructed per building code standards. Thus, they're not being inspected by any official or building inspector.
Mr. Chairman, may I interject? we ask Mr. Grove to formally introduce the environmental analysis at this point?
Excuse me? The environmental
Never
section is
mind.
coming later. Yeah.
Never mind.
Okay. Again, those remodels are being conducted without permits, and they involve a significant amount of electrical work due to the indoor grow activities to support that, which creates extreme fire hazards. There's illegal cultivation also strains our scarce water supplies. We are in a 5th year of an historic drought. The marijuana plant itself requires a lot of water. A source from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife states that a single marijuana plant will use approximately 6 to 8 gallons of water per day. Again, we're in the 5th year of an historic drought. We have many county homes that are without water due to the drought and receive or are in a program called the Emergency Bottled Water Assistance Program. But then there are individuals that abuse that. This photograph is an example of stored water. Sparkletts Water is the brand that has a distinct marking on these boxes and on the bottle itself, and corresponds to that emergency bottled water program. This photograph was taken in September of 2015 when the Sheriff's Department and RMA conducted a area-specific warrants in that area. This is also a different site in Seville in September of 2015, and you can see these empty water bottles strewn about near the plants that appear to be used for irrigation purposes. This time I turn it over to Detective Tim Johnson.
Good morning. Tim Johnson. My address is 2404 West Burrell in the city of Visalia. Again, my name is Tim Johnson. I'm a detective with the Tulare County Sheriff's Department. I've been with the Sheriff's Department for 14 years now. The last 3 have been with the Sheriff's Tactical Enforcement Personnel Unit. And we do a majority of the marijuana investigations within Tulare County. We've been seen an increasing number of marijuana grows that we've criminally eradicated. This graphic here shows our total sites, marijuana grows on the valley floor, and then grows that we find in the mountains. As you can see, in our fiscal year reports, we've seen a steady increase. We saw a slight decrease in 2014 to 15, and then another increase in mountain grows in 2015 to 16 with 22. Although the amount of marijuana seized or eradicated varies over the past 4 years, the Sheriff's Department has eradicated an increasing number of sites each year, both on the valley floor and in the mountain areas of Tulare County. The Sheriff's Department continues to find that large, sophisticated drug trafficking organizations, or DTOs, most notably the Zetas and Gulf cartels, are increasing operations in the Central Valley under the guise of California medical marijuana laws. They are responsible for most of the large valley grows we encounter, also coordinated advanced networks of backyard and indoor grows involving multiple grow sites with different recommendation holders at each location. In most cases, recommendation holders, they are solicited by these drug trafficking organizations. They obtain their medical marijuana recommendation, and they're posted at different grow sites without their knowledge. This graphic I'm showing you here, this is a photograph of a large marijuana grow that was located in the Delano area in April of 2015. The Sheriff's Department authored search warrants for this property, and we located and eradicated over 12,000 marijuana plants. We made 30 arrests during this operation, and of those 30, we we have 27 felony convictions. This was a joint effort through RMA, our Roads Department, the Sheriff's Department, and other narcotics task force. It was a very large operation, and it just goes to show the scope and scale of the cultivation that's happening here on the valley floor. Other concerns that we encounter are firearms. Due to the value of marijuana, firearms are commonly used to deter or defend marijuana plants and or cash from the sale of marijuana. About 1/3 of the weapons we recover or seize in 2015 were reported lost or stolen. The Sheriff's Department is currently investigating a homicide that occurred in June of 2016 and is believed to be related to the sale of marijuana. This next photograph here, these are items that we commonly find during our investigations. In the bottom bottom right-hand corner of the photograph, you can see there's a number of firearms. And then at the bottom of the screen, those are cell phones that are pictured there. Oftentimes, those involved in the illegal cultivation of marijuana will maintain several cell phones in order to prevent detection from law enforcement. In the bottom left-hand corner, you can see a large sum of money that was seized during this operation. And at the top of the screen, that's processed marijuana. The bags of marijuana, those are 1 pound increments. That's commonly what we find with these illegal cultivators. Another concern is honey oil. The Sheriff's Department is increasing investigations into honey oil labs, or also known as hash oil. We find a number of these laboratories within Tulare County. Honey oil is a concentrated form of cannabis that is potent and also very valuable. The manufacturing of this is very dangerous. It involves a solvent, most cases it's butane, is used to chemically extract the tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC, from the marijuana plant. The THC is the intoxicating compound of marijuana. And most of the solvents that are used are often flammable, and they can lead to explosions and other fire incidents. In 2014, 49 confirmed explosions at marijuana extraction labs were reported nationwide. 31 of those were in Colorado and 18 in other states. This next photograph shows some of the equipment that is used for the extraction of honey oil or concentrated cannabis. On the table, you'll see a large pot with a hose protruding from the top. That is a vacuum chamber that is used to purge butane from the honey oil or the finished product. Also, cylinders are used. The butane, or the torch, is not necessarily used in the manufacturing of the honey oil, but just behind it, there's a smoking implementation, and that's what the torch is used for. Oftentimes, we find heat sources or torches in the same area that we find these laboratories, which can be very dangerous and has a high potential for explosions. The next photograph also illustrates more equipment that is used in manufacturing of concentrated cannabis or honey oil. In the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, that is the finished product. That is a glass dish with a tarry black-green residue. That is the finished honey oil. The way it's done is the PVC pipes are filled with marijuana plant material. They are capped on one end, and then a coffee filter is most commonly put at the other end. They push butane through the cylinder, and what comes out is that honey oil. Oftentimes, the gases are heavier than air, so they'll pool on the floor. And by the time it reaches a heat source at, say, an electric outlet or a heat source higher up, there's so much gas that it causes explosions. Then we have increasing threats due to honey oil extraction. So enforcement data suggests that number of honey oil labs in the county may be increasing. In 2015, we investigated 6 honey oil labs, and year to date, we've already investigated 5 honey oil labs. Just as recent as July of this year, the 22nd, 23rd, we served 24 warrants in the cities of Pixley, Teviston, and Early Mart, and located a honey oil lab during that operation. The next thing we encounter is child endangerment. This photograph here illustrates, in my opinion, kind of, in essence, what these children are facing. This is a child's activity station that we found in the middle of a marijuana grow. If you look to your left of the photograph, that is a fertilizer, a powder form fertilizer. If that becomes airborne, it could be a health hazard for the children. Marijuana cultivation and honey oil labs frequently occur in households where children are present, thereby endangering children. Highly toxic fertilizers and pesticides sometimes used in the cultivation of marijuana. Children may have access to these treated plants or chemicals themselves. Fumes, explosions, and access to potent honey oil extracts can cause great bodily harm or injury and or death to children. These fertilizers pictured here, the brand is called Jungle Juice, and as you could see, it's a brightly colored label. It may be hard to see, but there's a cartoon-like figure in the center of the image. Children, with their curious nature, seeing these may be attracted to these colors, these cartoon characters, when in fact these are highly dangerous chemicals and fertilizers. This photograph here, this is copper sulfate. It's a common fungicide. We find these a lot in marijuana grows. This we found in June 22nd of this year. There were no children present, but the reason I included this photograph is oftentimes we find these fertilizers unsecured, such as this. And the bright blue color may be attractive to children. They may mistake it for a candy or some other type of treat. And again, we commonly find these in marijuana grows, unsecured. A large number of suspected child endangerment cases related to the cultivation, processing, manufacturing, and or distribution of marijuana. In 2015, we investigated 18 separate incidents of child endangerment. In 2015, so far we have investigated 7. Fraudulent or unlawful collective cultivation. Though most grow sites investigated by the Sheriff's Department have multiple recommendations posted, most grows appear to be cultivating for profit and not for the benefit of the collective as outlined in state law and county ordinance. Some collectives obtain or use medical marijuana recommendations in a fraudulent or unlawful manner, including paying individuals to obtain marijuana recommendations to support the number of marijuana plants found at these grow sites. We know this through admission, through witness interviews. Often the person whose recommendation is found at a site has no knowledge of or any involvement with the cultivation of the marijuana after it is obtained. At least once we found copies of the same marijuana recommendation posted at multiple grow sites and in different cities. Another increasing trend is electricity theft. The Sheriff's Department has received several reports regarding marijuana cultivators stealing power by tapping into electricity before the meter. Most of these are found at indoor marijuana grows. It is very costly to run and operate an indoor marijuana grow. A majority of the indoor marijuana grow investigated by the Sheriff's Department in 2016 were later determined to be stealing power. Initial estimates suggest that the first half of 2016 alone, over $300,000 in unreported power usage can be attributed to indoor marijuana grows. This next photograph, I know it's hard to see, is where these cultivators tapped into the electric panel. It was crudely done. You can see carbon marks or where the wires have arced, and these power thefts have a great potential for fire and other hazards. Additional concerns. It's not clear what MRSA or the decriminalization of recreational use of marijuana in California, if it will reduce the demand for black market cannabis products or the illegal cultivation of cannabis. But not all geographic regions are suited to cannabis cultivation. Cannabis may still be illegally cultivated in the county to meet the demand in markets outside California. Taxation and regulation may cause price of marijuana to increase, pushing some purchasers to the black market. In June 24, 2016, a traffic stop was made in the area of Yokel Drive. The deputy detected a strong odor of marijuana coming from this vehicle. A search warrant was authored, and this is what we located inside. Over 100 pounds of processed marijuana was being transported through Tulare County from a grow site in Tulare County. Here's another photograph showing that 100 pounds of processed marijuana. And then I'll turn this over to Chief Charles Norman.
Good morning. Good, Charlie. That's very good. Good morning, members of the board, CAO, County Council. I'm Charlie Norman, your County Fire Chief. Just to go over kind of my voir dire, I have 30 years of fire service experience. 20 of that has to do with investigations, another 20 with hazardous materials team response. I also served 5 years as a fire marshal for the city of Visalia. As you go into fire hazards and causes, there's really only 3 causes of fires: accidental, incendiary, or unknown. And beyond that, they all fall into those classifications. The unknown model, 30% of all fires are determined as unknown. So there are a lot of those that we aren't catching due to the consumption of fuels, the consumption of any of the points of origin, or any of prosecutable evidence that we have at these scenes. The one that we do have that you could actually testify in court that this was caused by a lab or a honey oil fire was in Badger approximately 1 year ago. Witnessed a large explosion, structure was completely involved, and then we had 2 victims. A male victim, second and third degree burns over 75%, and the female suffered some smoke inhalation. And with that being in the Badger area, the crews did a great stop on that, keeping it out of the urban interface area. It did create a potential wildland situation, and with our tree mortality and the rest of the drought issues is of grave concern to us in the industry. They did determine the cause of the fire was a honey oil extraction lab. Conclusions based on experience, training, witness statements, and on physical evidence, and turning with large canisters on the scene. And with the canisters, butane, propane really have a specific gravity, or vapor density that's much greater than air. So it falls into low-lying places. So where you have a natural gas leak in a residence, it's going to dissipate. You open up some windows, you ventilate it, and it's non-hazard at that point. It does have a low-level hazard, but the ignition temperature and the boiling point of butane and propane are so much lower than natural gas. They create some significant issues. This is the end product of what we had in the Badger residence. And again, notice the large urban interface behind the house that we had approximately a 2-acre grass fire on after that. Here is the consumption that we had of the residents during that fire. Notice the total devastation, and the response time on this, I believe, was within 6 to 7 minutes. It was right around the corner from the station, so you didn't have an extended response time on this. This is the damage of pretty well-involved structure by the time our crews arrived. Here we have some of the butane canisters, and again, a lot of these are used for have legitimate uses with camping and so on and so forth, and are very easily stored, interior storage, but and propensity, unless you have a puncture of some sort, they don't create a real leaking hazard like an external, like a larger propane cylinder. Remnants of what's left of the portable cook stove used for extraction in the honey oil lab. Minimal butane in the air. Again, we talk about vapor density and ignition sources. It can be anything from static electricity, rubbing your feet on a carpet, rubbing your hair, or an ignition source as an energized outlet, a light switch, any type of sparking because of the ignition temperature and the boiling point of butane being so low. Can result in severe burns, injuries, hazardous vapors and chemicals used in extraction can cause some problems for us. And additionally, when you have an explosion, a detonation or deflagration of this level, the structural members of the residences are usually displaced, causing greater hazard to entry and attack. Any questions on that? All right. Thank you.
I'll go over what the proposed ordinance will entail. So to protect the public health, safety, and welfare of Tulare County and its residents, Government Code 65858 will allow this new interim ordinance to be approved by the board if so desired. It will prohibit the establishment of new or the expansion of existing medical marijuana entities, including collectives, cooperatives, or individuals or other entities engaged in commercial cannabis activity in the unincorporated areas of Tulare County. No building permits will be issued for medical marijuana entities, and the interim ordinance requires a 4/5 vote. Initially, the ordinance will be in place for 45 days, but may be extended for 22 months and 15 days with a second public hearing. The purpose of the ordinance is to allow the county to research, investigate, and potentially develop new regulations and policies for the unincorporated areas of Tulare County in light of the changing landscape regarding medical marijuana regulation across the state. The current regulations in the ordinance code regarding individuals or collectives or cooperatives with the cultivation of medical marijuana that are not in conflict with this new interim ordinance will not be impacted. The purpose of the ordinance is just to prohibit the establishment of new collectives or cooperatives or the expansion of existing ones. So Government Code Section 65858F gives the county the authority to adopt a second interim ordinance due to the fact that there has been an event that changed the circumstances that required the adoption of the first interim ordinance. And essentially those changes were the MRSA legislation, which was enacted in 2015 and became effective in January of this year. Since the enactment of MRSA, there's been an increased interest in commercial cannabis activity in Tulare County. We've outlined some of the disconnects between the new legislation and the existing county ordinances, and we believe that the combination of these two items could result in the increase in unregulated marijuana activities, which could result in increased threats to the health, safety, and welfare of Tulare County and its residents. Regarding the penalties, so this could be considered a public nuisance subject to abatement as provided in Chapter 1 of Part 4 of the Tulare County Ordinance Code. Administrative fines could be issued under Chapter 23 of Part 1 of the Tulare County Ordinance Code, and any other fines that could be provided by statute, ordinance, or law. With that, I'll turn it over to Hector Guerra, our Chief Environmental Planner, who prepared the environmental document for this ordinance.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, legal counsel, CAO. My name is Hector Guerra. I'm Chief Environmental Planner of Tulare County's RMA Planning. My division is Environmental Planning. As a way of background, I've been with the county a little over 4 years. I've been practicing both planning and CEQA for nearly 33 years. So I do have some experience in the area with that. We were preparing for your consideration 2 CEQA exemptions applicable to this interim ordinance. We found 2 CEQA exemptions that specifically apply to the action we were asking you to take today. One is, number 1, the general rule, 14 California Code Regulations, Section 15061B3. We believe it is applicable and appropriate as there will be absolutely no physical change to the environment. Class 2, or Class 8, I'm sorry, number 2, Class 8, also 14 California Code of Regulations, that's Section 15308, actions by regulatory agency for protection of the environment. As the MMRSA contains both a state and local regulatory scheme in order to protect the environment. As such, the use of Section 15308 is applicable and appropriate. We analyzed all of the resources within CEQA, which are basically A through W, and just to highlight a few that quickly is air quality, no change, because the status quo will remain. Land use and planning, no change. Greenhouse gases, transportation and traffic, utility systems, hydrology, water quality. Absolutely no change, as this ordinance will retain the status quo. We look at the general rule exemption that's applicable to greenhouse gases, GHG. The Tulare County General Plan Background Report provides an emission inventory. Essentially, that emission inventory is a list of all the sources where GHG come from. So the total GHG emissions in the county are a little over 5.2 million metric tons per year. As far as air quality, if you look at no impacts, what's going to happen here is that the air district's threshold for commercial use is a little over 1,600 commercial use round trips per day. So that's quite a threshold. So the interim ordinance does not mandate any changes that would cause a change to these baselines. Again, it simply maintains the status quo. Also applicable because of the general rule exemption is no new building permits, occupancy permits, licenses, or other land use entitlements. Collectives and cooperatives operating lawfully may continue under current operations pursuant to all applicable laws, but not allowed to expand. The ability of qualified patients and persons with identification cards to cultivate for their personal use is unaffected by the interim ordinance. Thus, the interim ordinance presents no possibility of significant effect on the environment. The Class 8 exemption is supported by many of the MMRSA provisions contained both in state and local regulatory scheme to protect the environment. For example, the Business Code, Business and Professional Code, Fish and Game Code, and the Health and Safety Code. And I wanted to read just real quick passages of some of the applicable ones. For the Business and Professional Code at sections 19302 to 304, and I want to read this into the record, 19316A, 19320A, 19331, 19332D, and E2. At 19303, protection of the public, and I quote, protection of the public shall be the highest priority for all licensing authorities in exercising its licensing, regulatory, and disciplinary function under this chapter. Whenever the protection of the public is inconsistent and other interests sought to be promoted, the protection of the public shall be paramount, end quote. At the California, at Cal Fish and Game Code 12029, the legislature finds and declares the following. 1, the environmental impacts associated with cannabis cultivation have increased, and unlawful water diversions for cannabis irrigation have a detrimental effect on fish and wildlife and their habitat, which are held in trust by the state for the benefit of the people of the state, close quote. And finally, at the California Health and Safety Code section 11362.77, and I will read all of these, says, I'm sorry, I'll just summarize it. It's a medical cannabis cultivation program, required licenses, permits, regulations, unique identification program, notice by city and county, licensing issued. And that is basically, it says a county city or county and city, local issued conditional use permit requirements must be at least as stringent as the department's state's licensing requirements. So with that, I think we could summarize that because the status quo will retain the existing ordinance and your interim ordinance will retain the existing requirements, there will be no impact as far as the environmental are concerned, and the use of the general rule exemption and the Class 8 exemption are appropriate and applicable. Thank you.
And I think it's at this point that I ask for clarification.
Yes.
That the environmental documents are part of the official record of this matter.
Okay, with that, I'll summarize the request. Item number 1 is to set and hold a public hearing on August 16th, 2016. Item number 2 is to approve a categorical exemption per general rule and Class 8 exemptions pursuant to the California Environmental Quality Act. Item number 3 is to adopt the interim zoning ordinance prohibiting the establishment of new or the expansion of existing medical marijuana entities, including collectives, cooperatives, businesses, or other entities engaged in commercial cannabis activity in the unincorporated areas of the county. This item requires a 4/5 vote. Item number 4 is to approve a summary of the ordinance and direct the clerk of the board to publish and post the summary within 15 days after passage in the Visalia Times Delta in accordance with Government Code section, and actually we make a revision here, it should be 25124B1 as opposed to 25125B1. Item number 5, or request number 5, is to direct the Environmental Assessment Officer of the Tulare County Resource Management Agency to file a notice of exemption with the Tulare County Clerk. Request number 6 is to set a public hearing on September 20th at 9:30 a.m. Request number 7 is to direct the clerk of the board to notice such hearing in accordance with Government Code section 65858 in order to consider this ordinance and a proposed extension thereof prior to the expiration of this ordinance. And request number 8 is to direct the director of the RMA or his designee to issue a written report 10 days prior to the expiration of the interim ordinance or to the extension thereof if applicable, describing the measures taken to alleviate the conditions which led to the adoption of the ordinance. So with that, I'd like to thank our Resource Management Agency staff, particularly Michael Grove and Hector Guerra for their work on this report, Tulare County Sheriff's Department for their contributions to our report, specifically Detective Tim Johnson, Tulare County Fire Department. The fire chief was extremely helpful in preparing this report as well. The Ag Commissioner, Marilyn Kinoshita, for her assistance, and the CAO for his guidance on this report. So that concludes staff's presentations. If there's any questions.
Thank you, Ben. That was a very, very thorough presentation. Thank you for all the presenters. I think you covered everything very well. So any comments from the board?
I was just going to echo those compliments. Really great job, Ben, and also the Sheriff's Department, Fire Department, Code Enforcement. Everyone did an excellent job. That was very thorough and documents why we need this ordinance in Tulare County. And I just wish that more counties, more people in the state of California would realize the threats that this poses to not only our children, but the safety and well-being of our communities. So I think you did a great presentation, and I'll definitely pass on your contact information to anyone I come in contact with that wants to see something like this up and down the state. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Ben. We will open the public hearing now. Anybody wishing to speak to this issue may do so at this time. Seeing none, we will close the public hearing. Public hearing is now closed. This item is on the board's closed session agenda, so the board will convene to closed session. Time to discuss this item at this time.
This is on your board's closed session agenda as item C.
I vote the
guess you paid for all that.
Exactly. And his closing statement, I think, was Al.
It's good seeing you do a presentation. It's nice and work a computer too.
How's your wife feeling?
Doing great. Doing great. Her back's finally getting a little better. So she had that herniated disc.
Cloud? Give you options of what it could be.
Online and see if
They're probably the options.
Okay, we're back in session. Before we bring it to the board for vote, we are going to read some verbal amendments to the interim ordinance. Council?
Chair, in addition to the material before you today, the following verbal amendments are being proposed. Is that on? There you go. The following is added to the first sentence of Section 4, as described further herein. There is a current and immediate threat to the public safety, health, and welfare caused by the proliferation of unregulated marijuana activity being conducted by medical marijuana entities, and the approval of use permits, variances, building permits, or any other applicable entitlement for use issued to a medical marijuana entity would result in a threat to public safety, health, and welfare. In Section 6, Subdivision I-2, that is struck and replaced with a new Subdivision I-2, which states as follows. Although the amount of marijuana seized and the number of plants eradicated varies from year to year, the total number of marijuana grow sites eradicated by the Sheriff's Department has been continuously increasing each fiscal year since at least 2012, both on the valley floor and in the mountain areas. Furthermore, the Sheriff's Department has evidence that large, sophisticated drug trafficking organizations, DTOs, most notably the Zetas and the Gulf cartels, are increasing operations in the Central Valley under the guise of California's medical marijuana laws. The Sheriff's Department's investigations suggests that these DTOs are responsible for most large valley grows, and that they coordinate sophisticated networks of backyard and indoor grows involving multiple grow sites with different recommendation holders at each site. Finally, Section 6, Subdivision I-3 is struck and replaced with a new Subdivision I-3, which states as follows. Due to the value of the marijuana, firearms are commonly used to defend marijuana plants and cash from the sale of marijuana from theft. In fiscal year 2014-2015, the Sheriff's Department seized 161 firearms located at or associated with marijuana grows in Tulare County. In fiscal year 2015-2016, the Sheriff's Department seized 89 such firearms. Approximately 1/3 of the weapons recovered in 2015 were reported lost or stolen. The Sheriff's Department is currently investigating a homicide that occurred in June 2016 that is believed to be related to the sale of marijuana.
Here, you're going to read the last section in too?
Okay, it stays in because it's not being deleted.
That's it, right.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Mr. Chairman, that's...
Okay. All right, I'll bring it back to the board for discussion and vote.
Chairman, if there's no further conversation, I would move approval of this item as amended by the verbal statements made by council.
I'll second that.
Moved by Supervisor Worthy, second by Supervisor Vanderpool. Cast your votes. Votes unanimous. Thank you. Thank you, council. Okay, we'll take up item number 5. I do have a statement to make. This is a continued hearing from July 19th to consider the appeal related to the Planning Commission's approval of a final site plan number PSR 14-005 for the rail operations by Richard Best Transfer. This plan was approved by the Planning Commission on May 11th meeting. This plan was tentatively approved by the Board of Supervisors on July 19th with instructions to staff to bring back written findings on August 16th for the Board's acceptance and approval. This continued hearing is being held on August 16th at about 10:42 at Burrell Avenue in Visalia. The appellants are Dinuba Citizens for Responsible Planning, San Joaquin Valley Environmental Defense Center, and Roger Wazowski. The parties are represented by their counsel, Mr. Richard Harriman. At the hearing on July 19th, the board heard all pertinent evidence offered by the interested persons. The hearing is open to the public. However, if any member of the public disrupts the hearing, he or she will be asked to leave. This is a public hearing, and at this time, we invite any member of the public who wishes to speak to this matter to do so. Please limit your comments to the relevant topic and providing new information. I say again, new information that has not already been discussed. Please state your name and address for the record. Public comments may be limited to 3 minutes.
I believe there's a staff presentation.
Okay, we'll go with staff presentation, then we'll have the public hearing.
Thank you. Mike Washam, Economic Development and Planning Branch, Assistant Director. Just a brief review. Your board considered all of the record, the full record, in making its decision back on July 19th, which is right here, the addendum to the previously adopted neg deck, all of the comments, response to comments, all the attachments were all fully considered and part of this back on that appeal hearing date. Your board directed staff to come back with some findings for your decision and consideration today, and that's what we're doing today, this morning. The response or the findings and conclusions were attached in your packet. Yesterday afternoon, we received a letter from Attorney Richard Harriman, and I just wanted to briefly respond to some of the comments in that and the objections. So he basically spelled out about six items that he mentioned. First, that the appellants object to all the findings within everything. So I just, in response to that, the findings and conclusions are very comprehensive and complete, and the record stands and speaks for itself on that matter. Secondly, he talks about the noise study, and the addendum did not address the project as approved. Well, there is no, and he goes into detail about significant changes of the project. The project itself is for the commodity barn and the hard car unloader. The project is not the rail spurs, is not the business operations. It's specifically for the hard car unloader, and that as part of the settlement agreement. Therefore, there's really been no significant change. The focus of the appellant has been on the crossing arm, which was there is no nexus to the project. That crossing arm was going to be installed. It was installed before this project was approved. It has nothing to do with what the Planning Commission and your board is looking at here. Rebuttal to the objection to the testimony of Roger Wadowski. Specifically, he played train noise into the microphone. Yesterday afternoon, we received a photocopy of a certificate certifying that Mr. Wadowski is a registered radiologic technician based out of Los Angeles, and that was the basis of his expertise. But really, what we're talking about is that there was a recording on a mobile device that is amplified being played into a microphone which is amplified, which has no credibility or scientific evidence as such, and that's what we're looking at there as far as that goes. Rebuttal to the objection to the testimony of John Ennis as not a rail expert. John Ennis is a great guy, and he's an engineer, and his specialty is traffic. And we worked with him on many things, looking at the site plan overall, some of the things, and we've incorporated many of his suggestions into the conditions of approval. However, he's not a rail expert. and that's what the objection was for. If I talk to a weatherman and ask what the weather is going to be, that doesn't make me a meteorologist. I mean, he talked about some other project that had rail associated, but that doesn't make him an expert. There's no evidence in the record that he's an expert for rail design. Denial of additional conditions did not consider the specific project impacts, and again, that goes back to number 2 as well. There really is no significant change. He's focusing on the rail crossing, which was put in by the CPC that had a full environmental review. It's categorically exempt from CEQA. It's a safety issue, and it was going in and did go in before this project was approved, so it has no relation directly, no nexus directly to this project under consideration. And the last one, I won't address that, but there was an objection to the closed session, and if county council wants to respond to that, that would be that. But that would be my only comment on this. And with that, I would recommend that the board continue the hearing, open the comment, and then close the hearing and make the findings as attached in your packet.
Okay. Any questions from the board?
No.
Did you want county council to make a statement?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. First of all, it's unusual to have someone object to putting things on the agenda. Usually the objection is the reverse. In fact, any administrative appeal is administrative litigation. To clarify for your board and the public, in addition to significant exposure to litigation, this matter is actual litigation as with the case title and cause listed in the board's agenda. In addition to that, having someone, however informally, threaten to sue your board based on the action that you take is an exposure to litigation and is so identified. As I mentioned, it is routine for your board to list actual litigation, being administrative litigation, on your board's agenda. If there is no need for that, then when I announce your board's closed session agenda at the end of the meeting, I take those items off. I announce those items are off agenda. So
Thank you for that explanation. Okay, anybody wishing to speak to this morning? And new information, we don't want you going and hashing over everything you've already said to us. We've already heard that. Just give us some new relevant information if you've got it. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, honorable members of the board, county council, county administrative officer, other staff, and members of the public. Richard Harriman, representing the appellants who've already been read. I'd like to focus briefly on a couple of points. First of all, I want to clarify something that Supervisor Cox brought up at the hearing on July 19, which caught me by surprise because I went back and looked at my own words. And you asked me, did you not say this was one of the best records you'd seen? And I immediately said, no, I didn't. And I was wrong. I did say that. And the reason I didn't remember saying it that way, Supervisor Cox and members of the board, is that my compliment to your staff was for the work they did. My compliment about the record was that it was all set to go. We have the transcriptions, we have staff reports. It's a really well-organized record, and I stand by that statement. What I did not intend to state was that that meant that I agreed with all of the work product complying with law. And I don't want to do a dance around that, but I did want to respond to that directly so that you do have an answer about that. And so I can say, yeah, I did say that, and here's why. And I wanted to make that point for the record. Secondly, with regard to comment number 4A and 4B at page 9, the appellant's concern about the staff doing the work, being paid for the work, and then advising you and reviewing it for your board goes to the issue of the fact that you've not made a finding of independent judgment being exercised in this matter. And you can't, because your own staff is advising you and you're relying upon their advice and testimony. So that's the reason why we objected to that process. And number two, on 4B, the engineer's advice to us and assistance in the negotiations does not come from a neutral source. We're not neutral. We have an interest in this, just as the applicant does, and frankly, as your board does, based upon your county business strategic plan policy. So we really think you need a neutral, non-biased peer review of the staff's work. The other thing I wanted to answer in response to County Council's very focused response to our objection is that we think as a policy that when you set a hearing for any item and then you put before it a closed session and the board goes into closed session and discusses and pre-choreographs what they're going to say out here, that presents a very tenuous conflict between the California Ralph M. Brown open meeting law and the California Environmental Quality Act, which purports, both statutes purport to have openness and transparency in a governance. And nothing could be more important to that than hearing the deliberation and the reasoning behind the board's decision to approve or disapprove a specific project or to make rulings or findings regarding CEQA. So in effect, for example, your board's policy of the strategic business plan, in effect, kind of puts the thumb on the scales. It says some projects are going to be more preferred than others. Some interests are going to be more preferred than others. The interests of my clients, the residents, are going to be less preserved. Well, that's a discussion that ought to be had in open session. You can be pro-business, but that doesn't mean that you get to vary your analysis under CEQA. It doesn't mean that you get to go into closed session and make a deal, whatever the deal is, among all of you that we don't hear about until you come out, and we won't know about unless you deliberate and give us the reasons for it. So that's the reason why we've raised that. We think that that is a precedent that is not one that I've found any support for in the law. Council can agree to disagree and hopefully respectfully. Mr. Wozdatsky's credentials have already been presented. The reason for the responses to Mr. Slater's objection is he can object all he wants to their having a professional opinion. What we are saying is he can make that objection, and to the extent that they're not expert, that objection may be sustained. However, they also presented evidence as percipient witnesses, or in Mr. Ennis's case, as an expert on design, engineering design, and he also introduced photographs in his PowerPoint presentation which were factual. So again, for County Council's purposes and CAO, who's a former recovering attorney or whatever you are today, the bottom line is that we want to make sure it's really clear on the record that we do not waive our right to object that, and we do not waive the evidence that was introduced by Mr. Wozdatsky. He did measure on a decibel meter, and he testified to that. It may not be professional expert testimony as a noise expert, but it is testimony as a percipient witness. And you are allowed to weigh and balance that testimony. However, in this case, since you're doing an addendum to a certified negative declaration, the standard of review, we would contend, should be leaning toward fair argument, that if there's any substantial evidence of potentially significant environmental impacts from the sound of the train, you should consider that. Finally, I do want to make one closing comment in response to staff's rebuttal, and I'm sure Mr. Slater will comment. You still haven't addressed the issues we've raised about the failure to disclose, analyze, and consider the significant change in the environmental setting caused by the installation of the crossing arms. There's no evidence in the record that you ever did that. And number two, as we said, and this is the only thing that is slightly similar to the past, Mr. Chairman, is that with respect to the off-site impacts, the failure to have a noise study that was done after the safety arms were installed, the evidence is clear on that. We just wanted to make sure that we did not waive any of those arguments. If there are any questions, I'd be glad to answer them at this time.
I have a few.
Okay. Before she
If
speaks,
that's-
let
if that's
me
acceptable.
say something before she does. As to the issue of closed session, this is a bit of a surprise to me to see this objection.
Which one? I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
A closed session argument. We do not go back into closed session to discuss the merits of the case. We go back into closed session to seek legal advice from our counselor about the evidence that's been presented at the oral argument as to whether or not it has any impact on the written report that we have in recommendation from our staff. So it is not for purpose of discussion of the merits of the case, but for purpose of seeking legal counsel from our attorney that we go into closed session. That's the purpose of closed session. That's how it's used in this county. We don't go back there and discuss the merits of the case and think about a hearing with a pre-established impact or conclusion. So I object. I take offense to your comment. Yes, it's closed session, so what happens back there, I'm not saying that would not be a possibility. That would be a violation of the Brown Act, and that's not how we conduct ourselves. And our attorney, as an officer of the court, would preclude us from having such a conversation because that would be a violation of the Brown Act. And I take offense at your insinuation that in fact is what took place in closed session.
May I respond? I don't take offense at your taking offense. I'm raising it as a policy argument, and as Attorney Supervisor Wordley, I'm making the record on behalf of my client to make sure that we have raised every issue that my client is entitled to have raised. And my perception as somebody who does litigate Brown Act cases is that this is a policy argument which I want to tee up for the court to review. And so that's the reason. It's no offense generated at you. Just like as I told Mr. Washam before, I'm not criticizing staff personally. I like all of them. We've worked well together. It's a policy issue, and that's the reason why I raise it along with the policy issue of the review that was done by staff. It's procedural. It's not intended to impugn your integrity. It's intended to raise a procedural, legal argument. So if I owe you an apology for offending you, counsel, I tender it herewith. It's not intended to offend you. It's intended to make a good faith legal argument that we want to preserve.
Counsel, would you like to?
Well, first of all, what Supervisor Worthley said, I would repeat. Thank you, sir. Other than that, I understand that this is a policy argument that you are raising. Do you have any facts to support your belief that the board routinely adjourns to closed session as a sham to avoid public discussion? Because that is what you're saying.
No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that the procedure leaves it not open to the public to know what the deliberations are, because you conduct whatever discussions you have. Obviously, I have no evidence as I stand before you today that that's what you do. However, as a policy of this county, you do that very regularly. It's unlike any other county that I practice in, from Bakersfield to Reading. That's why I raise it as a policy argument. And again, I'm not criticizing anybody. I'm simply raising it as a legal argument that I think there's a dynamic tension going on between the Ralph M. Brown open meeting law, which is supposed to open governance and guarantee transparency of governance, and CEQA, which also seeks open governance, transparency, and responsibility and accountability for the political actions that are taken by this board. Now, I've practiced in front of this board for, as I say, 35 years. And the fact of the matter is that it's really important for the public and for somebody like me who represents petitioners to understand the way that the board's reasoning. We're allowed to know that. These are elected officials. They're covered by the political accountability policy of CEQA. And so when you go into closed session, you come back, there's no deliberation, and there's no discussion, then the public is deprived of its right of knowing the thinking and the reasoning that went on. It may be bad, good, indifferent, but we are entitled as members of the public, and I as an attorney practicing in the public interest are entitled to know what people think. Now I can see Mr. Cox, and he lets us know what he thinks. He did the last time. It looks like he's getting ready to do it again. But that's because he's saying it out here.
I would suspect, sir, that he also is offended. Your assumption, then, is that, however you characterize it, when we adjourn to closed session, the board deliberates on matters and then comes back out here and votes. That's what I'm hearing you say. Is that a fair summary of what you just said?
That's the appearance of it.
Okay, the appearance.
That's my point.
Okay, you have no facts to support that actually occurs.
I have no way of knowing, counsel. That's the point. The point is that the public is deprived of the reasoning that the board is using for its presentation. If it wasn't discussed back there, I don't know. I have no way of knowing.
Well, of course, sir, you would never know in any closed session if that were true. I would.
Counsel, let me just give an example, however. In the event, when we go back and we seek legal advice from our counsel, in the event that there is new factual information that is brought to our attention, we have routinely come back out here and we've had that open discussion. You have not necessarily been in our proceedings when that's happened. But my point is, if there is a sense that there is nothing new or different added to the arguments that have been presented to us, both primarily in a written form, then there's no need for us to have to say anything. If we concur with the staff's report, then our motion that is in concurrence with that recommendation and report, that is the finding, that is the findings of the board. That is our deliberation. And I mean, there's no deliberation. We heard everything. We've read everything. We've rendered an opinion. We don't have to go out and discuss how we came to that. We've had the information presented to us. And I can say we have had times when new information has been presented to this board. We've gone back into county council, back into closed session. County council has pointed out to us, this is new information. This needs to be addressed by the board in open session. We've come back in open session and we've had that conversation. So there is an implication that when we come back out and we say nothing, it's because we've been advised by our counsel there's really nothing we need to discuss. If we are in concurrence with the staff recommendation, we simply make a motion. I've been on this board for 18 years. That's how it's always been done. No one has ever, that I can recall, has raised an objection to that procedure or process as you were doing here this morning.
And you mentioned agree to disagree. I don't agree that we disagree. I take personally great offense to the concept that the obligation I take under the Ralph M. Brown Act to sign off on each of these items is done improperly or for the purpose of avoiding litigation. These board members are entitled to have legal advice in privacy because that is my ability to advise them and have that legal advice remain privileged. The assumption or the appearance or however you want to phrase it is frankly highly offensive, I suspect not just to me. And I want to state for the record that I or my deputies carefully review every item that is proposed to go on here, and every item that is proposed to go on the closed session doesn't necessarily make it to the closed session agenda. We take our obligations under the Brown Act very seriously, and I don't think there's anything further I can say. I understand your statement that you're making it for the record, and it's in the record now, and if you wish to create some sort of judicially made policy that somehow, I guess, certainly not to the benefit of the public's fisc, that the board hears something, then goes next week into a closed session and gets legal advice, and then the following week comes out and makes a decision. Have at you. I'm good with that. And I'm happy to defend that, and I suspect my colleagues in other counties would be equally happy to defend that.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I'll concur. We're all offended, me a little bit less than some others. Can we move on?
Yes, let's move on. I think we're going to let's close the public hearing.
Wait, Mr. Wozdatsky would like to make a comment.
Make it brief.
I have a letter here. Oh, I'm Roger Wozdatsky. I live a few hundred feet away from the project, 42481 Road 72, Dinuba. I have a letter here. There are 7 copies there. Sir Harriman wanted me to elaborate a little bit, but they already said that I was a radiologic technologist, and I have a ARRT license and a CRT license, which is a state. ARRT is more like national. And just a couple more items. I worked as a technologist for 35 years in the Los Angeles area, and also I've been a short time in the Army out in Virginia, near the hospital out there, and several other clinics over the years. And I'm going to point out here that page 3, 4, and 5, it's a list of all the horn blasts, which we talked about before. But I turned in this recording last time, and I saw the printed comment on it later that it was going to be disregarded, like the same as throwing it in the trash can, I guess. But however you want to define whether it's legitimate or not, it's all written out here in a format that's just printed. Like was mentioned before, I don't know how to be an expert to put this down here. And also the idea that the volume may have been altered on the recording device, and therefore it makes it a certain degree of invalidity. I'm not talking about only the volume. When you listen to that recording, you can tell how many horn blasts there were. You don't have to be an expert to deduct that from that recording. As I recall it, there were 86 horn blasts in that sequence of the delivery and pickup of the railroad cars. I think it was like an hour and 36 minutes. And this is going on quite a bit over there. You said don't bring up old information. This is kind of old, but if you want to look up and down this list, 9, 12, 15, there were 54 horn blasts. On 11, 3, 15, 2 different visits that day, there were a total of 79 horn blasts. I live about 550 feet from the railroad track, so it comes straight across to me, and this horn blast situation is going on concentrated around Avenue 424 where they cross it the most, Road 72, and then back on the project, which is several hundred feet farther to the north.
Hey, go ahead and wrap this up.
Okay, let me go to the next page here. I want to point out that I turned in this survey here, or petition. It was never published in the comments, so maybe it's due to confidentiality or something. But I want to point out that it was mentioned, too, the fact that one of the other petitioners kind of basically dropped out, but this shows that that's not totally true because Reuben Navarro Sr. signed this petition, showing that he's still against the noise aspect of the program, of the project. And he also wrote a letter, which is one of these, here his son actually wrote it, that he's against, he's for curtailing the noise from the horn.
Yeah, let's wrap it up.
Okay?
Okay?
Also, this transcript from the voicemail, I'm proposing that the county implied that Reuben Sr. wrote this when he didn't write it. It was Reuben Jr. that wrote it, so just keep that in clarification. So I'm terminated now, or do I have a couple more minutes?
No, you're done.
Okay. Thank you.
Bring it back to the board. I don't think there's any need for closed session. I didn't hear anything new today that I hadn't heard last time.
There were a few new items
Nothing
that were presented to your board. At this point, I would suggest that you simply accept them as part of the record rather than addressing any objections unless someone from the railroad is here to raise one. No. And I'm available to give you legal advice regarding the new items. If your board chooses it, it is on your board's closed session agenda.
It's up to you. What do you guys? I don't think
I think I'm at a loss for words. I have to go back and plan out my script as to what I say when I come back out because I don't know how to think for myself on my feet. I think that this presentation just is to basically reiterate what was made at the July 19th meeting and present findings. And I think that this project that Richard Best Transfer is bringing forward is going to improve their operations. And they've done quite a bit to be a good neighbor and minimize impacts to surrounding areas. And I do think that residents in the area, of course, would be offended by train noise, but that's part of the life in the area. And no one likes to hear train noises, but it's better to have that safety and have trains sound their horn so that people aren't killed by them. But with that, I think that I'm comfortable moving forward and making a motion that we approve this item as presented to us by staff.
That would uphold the Planning Commission.
Yep, upholding the Planning Commission's decision.
Second the motion.
Okay, moved by Supervisor Vanderpool, second by Supervisor Wordley. Cast your votes. Votes unanimous. Thank you. We have need for closed session, Council?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we do. Item A being off your board's closed session agenda. Also, items B and E are off your board's closed session agenda. Remaining, you have items A through L listed. I do not anticipate any. There may be an announcement.
Okay, this concludes our open session. Thank you, everyone, for being here.
Which are the best kind, I think. Aye. Announcement at a closed session today, Tuesday, August 16th, by Kathleen Bales-Lang, County Council, in the matter of Tulare Pediatric Health Center, FQHC versus Department of Healthcare Services, OAH number FQ 140610 718G-GP, listed on the board's agenda today as item I. The board voted to file a petition for writ of mandamus in the matter on motion of Supervisor Worthley, seconded by Supervisor Ishida, on a unanimous vote. There are no other announcements.